magic length, they all work because kids want to engage in snackable content or sit down and watch long form content. It's a really wonderful platform for us because of that diversity in terms of viewership, and then a lot of success working directly with YouTube Kids. And I will say the secret to our success, because we've been wildly successful on YouTube, is that we literally sat down from day one with the YouTube Kids folks and asked them how to be most successful in launching the content, the cadence, the formats, the diversity of the slate, the way we used metadata and screen grabs and everything, and they gave us all their best practices. We followed every one of them, and within our competitive set, we've been most successful with very little in terms of media spend, and it's truly just because they know their business. So just listen to them.
Thanks. That's great. Krista, you talk to us about the choices you make in storytelling when you're coming up with these ideas. And then before you go out to pitch anybody, what do you focus on?
Well, the company has always really strived to focus on reflecting kids' real lives back at them, and having something to say. So each show that we make, we start with, what do you want to say? And it's a core principle that our founder, one of our founders, JJ Johnson, who's the creative lead at our company and the creator of Endlings, every show has to have that. When he's like, what do you want your next show to be, Sims? What do you want to say is the second follow-up question. And that's really, really important to us, because I think having a point of view, I think Libby and Melissa both spoke to that, about having creators with a point of view. And so, for example, I'll take the case study of Endlings. There was a WWF study a few years ago that said that species were at risk, biodiversity on Earth was at risk, and that recently was upgraded to 1 million species at risk, right? So that was what was out there in the ether. And JJ is an avid environmentalist, and he wanted to inspire kids to action, to care about these species, to care about the planet. And so that was what he wanted to say, and how he wanted to say it was the next piece. So you want kids, you want to inspire them to action and change. How do you wrap that in an attractive package so that kids are engaged in that? So Endlings, loosely, starts with an alien who you didn't see because the CGI is on its way to being complete, who travels the galaxy, and they collect the last of things. So the last whatever from another planet, and it's set 20 years in the future. So the alien comes to Earth to take the last elephant. So that's where our show starts. With biodiversity at risk, we are looking at the end of elephants. It's a real thing that's going to happen. So setting it 20 years in the future meant that this alien could come to Earth and try and take the last elephant. As they're leaving our atmosphere, the ship malfunctions, and that ship crash lands into a farm, which is the home to 4 foster kids. And those 4 foster kids are all dealing with their own stuff. It's not their bio family, so they're diverse. They are differently abled. They are real kids dealing with real things. You saw that in the clip with Tabby and her mom. So in those things, one of the core principles of that show is that you can't help anyone else until you help yourself. And so the first season, we really dealt with having empathy for yourself and dealing with the stuff that's happened to you, and then you can move on and deal with the world and start to have empathy for others. So the basic message of that show is helping the world, helping animals, making sure that life continues beyond this generation and onward. So that's a case study of how Sinking Ship approaches shows. Then we've had other shows, Dino Dana, Odd Squad, Androids, Dino Dan, and they all started that way with, what do we want to say? Mm-hmm. And so what do you want to say isn't necessarily like, if you want to say, we want girls in STEM like Androids did, you got to find a way that boys are also going to be interested in that show. And the way that was done was by making a girl character, Anne, who created androids, and we had CG androids that were amazing, and it was... Oh, someone's really excited on the other room. They love androids. So, and that was a show about experiments and explosions and evil corporations, and it was more than just girls in STEM. But we started with girls in STEM, and then we thought, how do we make this cool to a larger audience? And the ability to do CG and live action hybrid is really important to us, because we feel like, you can do anything in animation. and we want to make live action that you can do anything in live action. So that's why we brought CG in-house, so that we have that control and we can make the kind of show that competes with animation, but in a live action world, and that kids can see themselves. And we continue to try and do that. Finn, as you saw on the show, is differently abled. This is the first time we've had a character like that in a show. And you really have to look for those kids. But they're out there, and so that's how we start with the show, and then the next step is to find partners who believe in it just like you do, which we've been lucky to do across the world, including ABC and BBC, among others, Hulu, Apple, Amazon. So yeah, so it's for us, it's like, what do you want to say, how do you want to say it, who are your partners, and we've been very lucky.
Yeah, lucky. You've worked really hard. Let's segue into writing specifically, because we've really upped the game in terms of live action for kids. Came to realize a number of years ago that kids are watching grown-up stuff after a certain age, and there's not a lot out there for them. And I think the industry really rallied around that and started to focus in. Now Anna's stepping into live action in a big way so that we can tell some stories that we just can't tell in animation. So what are your strategies? Maybe I'll start with Court. What are your strategies in terms of writing specifically to that age group?
Well, most of our scripted content is animation, but for there we start actually with the same place. What do we want to say, and how does, let's say Peter Parker, his emotional journey, how is that relatable to a kid experience, even though he has all these amazing powers? In terms of the live action stuff, we do have some scripting, but we experiment with this Young Storytellers program, and we're going to be doing a lot more of that, where kids write stories. Yeah. We provide mentors, and we provide context and content and characters for them to sort of embrace, and then we want to see what they write, and then experiment with having actors act out their scripts, and have an audience for that. So we're going to be doing more formats like that in our live, because we just can't do scripted, big budget stuff in the kids space with our IP.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, obviously the show that we showed, the first clip of The Unlisted, I think is a great example of probably where we're heading in terms of our writing and scripting. So we purposefully commissioned that show because we wanted to do something that was set in an Australian Indian family. So for us, it was important to have those people in the writer's room from the get-go. We've moved completely away from this idea of colourblind casting that you do at the end of the scripting process. So I mean, it doesn't make things easy. It does mean you're committing to something very early on that you then need to flow through the entire process. But what we did with that room, which was so fantastic, was bring in a lot of actually mid-tier writers who'd actually done quite a few things already, but were kind of invisible to the bigger writing kind of, I guess, group. And then we partnered them with some really good story and structure people who could really help them shape and form what they needed to do. Which was excellent. And then we always require in all of our shows that we bring in at least one immersion person. So that person really has very few credits, so it's kind of giving everyone a foothold at some point. But yeah, what was just really exciting about that process was at second draft we also decided to do just a full cultural pass on all of the scripts. So it wasn't necessarily a dialogue pass, it was actually just how do we make this really authentic to an Australian Indian family context. So we had one writer who just did that pass at second draft before we went on to the final draft. So that was kind of a really new and interesting process. So it meant that actually the big print got all the wonderful detail and texture that you're seeing on screen, because if it's not in the big print, it's not going to be on the final frame. So what happened then is when it went into the other departments, went into production design, et cetera, people took on the words that were in that big print. So for us, I feel like that was just a really, really successful process, and we'll be probably rolling that out a little bit more as we go along. Obviously, we also are very supportive of Indigenous content creators in Australia. We've got an amazing talent pool that we have developed as an industry over kind of a 15-year period. So we also have a similar philosophy, I guess, if we're doing Indigenous content. For us, it has to be authored by an Indigenous person. That's really important. Often they may partner with a non-Indigenous company to realise the project, but yeah, I think for us it's really that authenticity of voice and then the diversity of voice that we're finding is just a really exciting space and stories we haven't told before, which is really good.
I was really excited to see the sports-related shows that both of you are bringing forward, with football at the center of it. And for the BBC, the mix between this real life setting, and I go to a lot of soccer tournaments in North America, they don't look anything like that. And this fictional storyline is really interesting. How did you put that room together, or how did the team put that room together?
The Jamie Johnson.
Yes.
They were just. It's two brothers who make that show, and they live it and breathe it, and it's their passion, it's their joy, it's their pain. They basically saw this opportunity that there was this extraordinary tournament, and they thought, okay, right, we want to shoot something there. So literally, they entered them in as a team into this international tournament, and they had to kind of go with it. So they happened to win 6 matches. They got through to the quarterfinals, which was just insane. It was lucky. They could have crashed out in the first round, but that's just how it played out. They blocked out the story and had lots of different, like, if this happens, then this is going to happen. This happens, and that's going to happen. But no, it was just a really bold, audacious. Actually, you kind of thought, we can't do that. Actually, they just did it. We were just in awe because it really created this. I mean, they took part in the opening ceremony. They carried the flag. You could see the nerves on the kids' faces. That wasn't acting. That was real because they were having to walk out into 40,000 people. So, but in a way, that's kind of the rawness and the freshness and the immediacy of being at this real event. That really translated into the writing as well. I think that kind of, absolutely to what you were saying about authenticity and diversity and those things. There's so much more rigor around that now than there was 5 years ago. You know, I think in terms of it's just not good enough anymore not to have a very diverse writers' room. It's just not good enough, and we're not going to put up with it. And you know, big agendas for people to write, and also pace. My goodness, the pace of the shows now is completely different than it was before. If there's a word in there that doesn't need to be in there, get rid of it. So duration as well, you know, make the story as long as it needs to be, so there's not this rigid sort of half-hour thing that you have to fill. Let's face it, in the past we would shove in a few scenes just to pad out to the duration. That's gone out the window now because the catch-up is so much more important. So, you know, pre-titles, getting rid of opening titles, they're just like a banner and we're off.